The rain in Long Beach did not fall. It struck. It hammered the corrugated steel roofs of Pier E, turning the asphalt into a black mirror that fractured the sickly orange glow of the sodium lights. The night air smelled of salt, diesel, and ozone. Then came the smell of cordite. A vehicle, massive and black, was spinning. It was an armored SUV, but the armor had failed. A constellation of spider-webbed glass covered the passenger side, the impacts precise, clustered tight. The tires shrieked as they found no purchase on the slick ground, the heavy chassis sliding sideways until it met the concrete loading dock of the Solstice Tower residences with a catastrophic crunch of metal. Steam hissed from the ruined grille. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. Inside the service entrance, Marisol Trent flinched, her hand tightening on the handle of her housekeeping cart. 29 years old, a single mother and invisible. That was her job, to be the ghost who cleaned the messes of the rich at 3 a.m. The woman residents looked through, not at... She peeked through the reinforced glass of the door, the wreck, the steam, the absolute stillness of the man in the driver's seat. Protocol screamed at her to call security, but the security desk was dark. The red light on her internal comm was blinking network error. Against every rule in her employee handbook, against every instinct for self-preservation, Marisol shoved the heavy steel door open. The rain hit her face like needles. She pushed her cumbersome plastic cart ahead of her, a ridiculous shield of bleach bottles and neatly folded towels against the unseen enemy in the night. The driver's door was wedged shut by the impact. The man inside was slumped, his suit immaculate even as it was darkening with blood. Marisol grabbed the handle, adrenaline surging, and pulled. It would not budge. She braced her worn sneakers against the dock and yanked again, a raw sound tearing from her own throat. The door groaned open. The man spilled half out, caught by his seatbelt. Marisol's fingers, raw from chemicals, fumbled with the release buckle. He was heavy, all dead weight and muscle. She hooked her arms under his, her cheek pressing against the damp, expensive wool of his jacket. She dragged him clear of the smoking vehicle, using the cart as cover, pulling him back toward the relative safety of the service corridor. She knew the face. Everyone in Long Beach knew the face, even if they only saw it on the society pages or the business gazettes. Don Seraphin Quaid, the billionaire recluse of the Quaid Consortium. The man in the shadows of the port is simply called the Don. Out on the water, beyond the towering cranes, the guttural thrum of a high-speed boat engine faded, heading back toward the dark expanse of the Pacific. The sound of sirens was conspicuously absent. The port police, usually aggressive in this sector, were nowhere. The silence was organized. This was not a robbery. This was an execution. She lowered him to the cold concrete of the service hall. His eyes opened, pupils constricted, focusing on her with painful intensity. He was breathing in shallow, wet rasps. He reached, his fingers gripping her wrist, his strength terrifying even now. He leaned close, his voice a gravelly whisper that cut straight through the drum of the rain. "Will you stay till morning?" It was not just a question, it was a plea, a command, and a desperate transaction all in one. Marisol's heart hammered against her ribs. Stay, she had to punch out. She had to catch the 5:15 bus back to Signal Hill. Luna, her 8-year-old daughter, needed her. Luna needed that dental appointment, the one Marisol had saved for 3 months to cover. Getting involved was suicide. But as she looked at the tactical precision of the bullet holes in the SUV, a different kind of fear settled in. Her survival instinct, honed by years of walking the line, screamed a different truth. They know someone saw. Leaving now was just as deadly as staying. She made the choice. We have to move. Seraphin nodded, his face pale. Marisol spotted the fire-retardant curtain covering a utility panel. She ripped the heavy fabric from its rings, tearing a long strip. She bunched it into a thick pad and pressed it hard against the oozing wound in his shoulder. He hissed, but did not cry out. "The generator room," she said, pulling his arm over her shoulders. It is shielded. He was a solid weight of lean muscle, nearly dragging her down, but she half carried, half dragged him down the hall. The generator room smelled of diesel and dust. She bolted the thick steel door behind them. She pulled out her cheap, prepaid phone. She dialed 911. Static. Just loud, angry static. Panicked, she tried the Solstice internal security app on her work tablet. A red banner flashed across the screen. Access denied. Someone had locked the entire building down. They were trapped. It is no use. Seraphin was leaning against the humming generator, his eyes scanning the concrete walls, analyzing. He looked at the puckered entry wound on his own shoulder, his expression less like a victim and more like an analyst. He gestured toward the door, toward the memory of the wreck outside, the spray pattern, the microcharges on the paneling. He looked back at her, his gaze sharp enough to cut. This is not the street. This is the signature of the Helios Task Force. Helios Task Force. The name meant nothing to Marisol. It sounded clean, official, like a government contractor, but the way he said it, it sounded like the end of the world. The emergency light above the door, a single, harsh bulb, flickered and then snapped on, bathing the small room in a sterile white glare. It illuminated the streaks of rain and sweat on Marisol's face, her eyes wide, trapped between the wounded Don and the silent, professional killers hunting him. She had stayed, and in that one decision, the entire axis of her life and her daughter's had just shifted forever. Marisol Trent was not built for this. She was a creature of routine, an immigrant from Albuquerque who lived by a single, unbreakable creed: do not get involved in the troubles of the wealthy. Rich people's problems were a different species of disaster, a vortex that swallowed people like her whole. She had seen it in the high desert clinics when she was a nursing student, before Luna's impending arrival had forced her to drop out, trading a stethoscope for a housekeeping cart. Nursing, cleaning it was all the same. Really, you managed the messes others left behind. Her mess, her only mess, was 8 years old and named Luna, who had her father's eyes and her mother's stubborn lungs that tightened with asthma when the Santa Ana winds blew. Luna, who needed her braces tightened next Tuesday. A $150 copay Marisol had finally saved. Luna, whose biggest dream was not a mansion or a pony, but just one afternoon in the bleachers, watching the Thunder Pasadena football team, a simple wish that felt as distant as the moon. That was her stake. That was the only thing that mattered. Her gaze snapped to the man leaning against the generator. Seraphin Quaid. He was a ghost in the city's ledgers, publicly. He was the sanitized face of clean tech philanthropy, the man funding solar arrays on the ocean, privately. He was the Don of the Quaid Consortium, a title he inherited and reshaped. He did not deal in drugs or vice. His power was logistical, colder. He controlled the refrigerated transport that moved vital medicines from the port to every hospital in the state. His protection was bloodless, enforced by contracts and information, not bullets. Until tonight. He was examining his own wound now, his fingers probing the torn fabric with a clinical detachment. Marisol, with her half-forgotten training, could see the wound was a through and through. The bullet had passed cleanly, missing the brachial artery by millimeters. Lucky. They used microcharges on the door panel, Seraphin said, his voice quiet but resonating over the generator's hum. He indicated the wound. This was secondary. They meant to trap me first. It was an internal job. The hit was precise, but the real clue was the timing. The attackers knew his route, his vehicle, and his defenses. And they knew the building. Marisol's stomach clenched. She looked at her work tablet, still flashing its useless access denied error, but the login screen was still visible, and beneath her own locked-out credentials was the activity log from the loading dock gate. 10 minutes before the ambush. Access granted. Cardholder M. Trent. She froze. She'd been in the penthouse laundry room, 200 floors up. She had not used her card. But she remembered. 2 days ago, the building manager, a nervous man named Calloway, had borrowed her MasterCard to check a faulty sensor. He must have cloned it. Someone had used her identity to open the gate for the shooters. They were not just hunting him, they were framing her. The city's political machine was already against him. The Metropolitan Anti-Organized Crime Council, a committee personally backed by the mayor, wanted Quaid gone. The MAOC was heavily invested in the Nova Aquifer project, a plan to tap the vast underground reservoir beneath the port. Seraphin had blocked it, citing contamination risks. The council saw him as an obstruction. They would use any excuse. And then there was the name he had whispered, the Helios Task Force. Marisol did not know them, but she understood the concept, a deniable asset, a private security contract run by a shadowy government arm, the Directorate for Federal Integrity. Helios did not make arrests. They cleaned scenes. They erased problems. Like her. She backed away from the steel door, her breath fogging in the cool, damp air. She fumbled in her pocket for her real phone, the cheap burner she kept separate from her work device. She pressed the FaceTime icon next to Luna's picture. The call connected, but the screen was a mess of pixelated static. The network was being throttled, jammed, only audio pushed through, thin and digitized. Mommy Luna's voice was small, trembling. "Luna, honey, are you okay? Where is Miss Cabrera?" She left, Mommy, a long time ago. A pause, then a sharp inhale. She forgot her purse. Miss Cabrera never forgot her purse. "Mommy, there is someone at the door." Marisol's blood turned to ice. "What do you mean? Baby, is it Miss Cabrera?" "No, they are knocking." Luna's voice dropped to a terrified whisper. "They are not knocking right. It is like a song. Tap, 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 tap." A rhythmic knock, a signal. Not a neighbor, not a friend. They were at her apartment in Signal Hill. They were at her door. They had Luna. The equation in Marisol's head solved itself. Her rule number 1 was broken. Her need to get home was irrelevant. The only path to saving Luna was through the man bleeding beside her. Seraphin was watching her, his dark eyes reading the terror on her face. He had heard the small voice. He already knew. His original question hung in the air. Will you stay till morning? It was not a request anymore. It was a contract, her service until dawn, traded for her daughter's life. Marisol looked down at her hands. They were shaking. She shoved them back into the thick yellow rubber housekeeping gloves she still wore. The synthetic snap of the rubber against her skin was the only sound that felt real. She looked up at Seraphine Quaid, the dawn. She nodded once. "We cannot use the main corridors," Marisol whispered, her voice deadened by the thrum of the generator. "They will be watching all the elevators and stairs." Seraphin leaned against the wall, the makeshift bandage on his shoulder already soaking through. "Agreed. Where?" "The spine." She pointed not at a door, but at a gray ventilation grate low on the wall. "This building has a parallel service spine. Ducts, electrical chases, plumbing. It is where the building breathes. I am the only one who ever cleans it." She used the tip of a mop handle to pry the grate open. The space beyond was dark, filled with the hum of high-voltage conduits. It was the advantage of the invisible. For 3 years. Marisol had memorized the building's true map, the one hidden behind the drywall and marble. They moved into the darkness. It was a tight fit, a world of metal rungs and concrete shafts. Marisol led, her movements sure, her rubber-soled shoes silent on the steel ladders. Seraphin followed, his breathing controlled, betraying his pain only with the occasional sharp inhale. They descended 2 floors, emerging behind a bank of vending machines in a sub-level lobby. The area was brightly lit, clean and terrifyingly empty. Then they heard voices. A team of 4 men in dark blue paramedic uniforms strode past the lobby, heading for the service elevators. They moved like soldiers, not medics. Marisol pulled Seraphin back into the shadows of the alcove. The men wore tactical earpieces and pinned to their chests, badges identifying them as Helios Emergency Response. As they passed, one man's radio crackled, a digitized voice. Clear in the quiet hall, sweep team 2. Confirm Aurelius is secure. We are green for extraction. Aurelius. The name clicked in Seraphine's mind, connecting to the Nova Aquifer project. This was not just an assassination. It was a corporate takeover by force. Marisol held her breath until the sound of their boots faded. She let it out slowly. The garage is 1 level below, but it is a kill box. We need a distraction, Seraphine murmured. He pulled a heavy, industrial-looking phone from an ankle holster Marisol hadn't seen. He snapped it open, ignoring its cracked screen, and inserted a tiny SIM card he produced from his lapel. His thumb moved quickly. Typing a simple message, 0-3-5, he sent it to a single contact, Evo. What is that, she asked. A protocol. Noon bell. It activates protection for civilians linked to me. He looked at her, his eyes dark. It is meant for my family. Now, it is meant for yours. He slid the phone back into his holster. The garage. How do we cross it? Marisol's eyes scanned the corridor, landing on her own abandoned housekeeping station. Next to it sat the RS-260, the autonomous floor scrubber, plugged into its charging port, a spark of an idea, born of pure, desperate absurdity, lit in her mind. They will expect us to run, she said. She walked quickly to the machine, unplugged it, and powered it on. She typed in her override code, switching it from its programmed route to manual remote control via her work tablet. Then she did something else. She hit the release valve on the industrial soap concentrate tank, letting the viscous blue liquid glug into the main water reservoir, creating a solution 10 times too strong. The main ramp. She whispered to Seraphine, "Go! Now!" As he moved, she sent the scrubber trundling toward the top of the ramp leading down to the garage. She followed Seraphine, keeping the tablet in her hand. They reached the P1 level. The garage was vast, a concrete cavern filled with luxury cars. They kept to the pillars, moving toward the exit. Footsteps echoed from the stairwell. Fast. "They are here," Seraphine said, drawing a small, flat pistol Marisol hadn't known he possessed. "Wait." Marisol tapped the screen. From the top of the ramp, the floor scrubber whirred to life and began its descent, its brushes spinning, laying down a comically thick, glistening sheet of high-density foam. A man in the Helios uniform burst through the stairwell door, saw them, and raised his weapon. He sprinted, shouting into his mic. He hit the patch of suds at full speed. The security camera above caught the moment perfectly. His tactical boots found zero traction. His arms windmilled. He was airborne for a split second, and then he crashed onto the concrete, his weapon skittering away. A second man, more cautious, skidded to a halt, staring at the spreading sea of bubbles. "Now," Marisol said, pocketing the tablet. They did not run for a sedan. Marisol dragged Seraphine toward the loading bay, toward a nondescript white truck stenciled with Coastal Gas Transport. The keys, as she knew they would be, were in the magnetic lockbox under the wheel well. She pulled herself into the driver's seat. The cab smelled of stale coffee and gasoline. She fired the engine. It rumbled to life as Seraphine climbed in, slumping against the passenger door. She slammed the truck into gear, the shifter stiff, the clutch heavy and accelerated. She knew this feeling. Her foster father had driven a container rig, and he had taught her, letting her practice in the empty yards of the port. She hit the ramp at full speed, scattering the remaining suds, and blew past the bewildered Helios operative. The gate arms snapped like a twig. They were out, merging into the wet, empty streets of the port. "Wilmington," Seraphine grunted, clutching his shoulder. "An abandoned church. St. Brendan's, the noon bell rendezvous." As Marisol wrestled the heavy truck onto the northbound I-710 freeway, the rain finally began to ease. The freeway was a river of red taillights, the late-night logistics chain of the nation. They were hidden in plain sight. Just another truck in the herd. Seraphine was watching her, his face a mask of pain and calculation. "You did not run." Back at the tower. Why? Marisol's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Because they are at my apartment, they are at my door. They have my daughter." The words hung in the cab, heavier than the storm had been. Seraphin was silent for a long moment. He reached inside his jacket, wincing, and pulled out a small, heavy object on a leather cord. It was a bronze charm, worn smooth with time, depicting a man in a boat. "This is St. Brendan," he said, "the navigator. My grandfather gave it to me when I first crossed the Atlantic." He pushed it into her hand, her fingers closed around the cool metal. "Keep it. If I do not make it, sell this. Take care of your daughter." Marisol could not speak. She gripped the charm, the weight of it an anchor. A new sound, a high-pitched whine, cut through the noise of the truck's engine. Seraphin looked in the side mirror. Behind us, drone. Marisol saw it, a dark shape with a single red eye, pacing them from above, keeping its distance. Seraphin pulled a device from his pocket, no bigger than a pack of cigarettes. He flipped a switch. The drone's red eye wavered. It listened to the side, suddenly unstable. Its signal severed. It dropped from the sky, disappearing into the vast, dark labyrinth of the container yards to their right. A second later, a dull, soft explosion lit the stacks, a muffled orange flash. Marisol turned onto the Wilmington off-ramp. The neighborhood was asleep, the streets lined with sleeping industrial husks. And then she saw it. The dark steeple of St. Brendan's, silhouetted against the clearing, pre-dawn sky. Seraphin stared at the bell tower. The plan was simple. The great bronze bell, the one named Noon Bell, should have been ringing, a signal from Evo that the path was clear. The bell tower was silent. The church was dark. "It is a trap," Seraphin whispered. "They are already here." The heavy steel door of the gas truck groaned open. Seraphin slid out, his hand pressed tight to his shoulder, but he did not kick the door to the church. He pushed it slowly, the ancient hinges whispering. The air inside was cold, tasting of plaster dust, mildew, and the oily scent of dead rats. It was not empty. Floodlights snapped on, dozens of them mounted on scaffolding in the apse. They illuminated the center aisle, turning it into a stage, pinning Marisol and Seraphin in the merciless white glare. "Don Quaid, how good of you to drop in." The voice was smooth, emanating from the altar. Alden Price stepped forward, not in a uniform, but in a $3,000 suit that looked untouched by the night's rain. He was flanked by two men in identical suits who looked like lawyers, and four others in tactical gear who looked like very expensive thugs. They were not police. They were, as the file suggested, private detectives. "Price," Seraphin said. His voice was flat, devoid of surprise. He kept his hand near his waist but made no overt move. "You look terrible, Seraphin. A bad night for the consortium." Price smiled. A thin, dry gesture. "But it can be a very good morning for Miss Trent's daughter." Marisol stopped breathing. The way he said it, so casual, so certain, was more terrifying than a direct threat. Price gestured to a folding table set up near the lectern, covered with precise stacks of documents. "We have your girl, of course. Helios is remarkably efficient, but they are just contractors. They follow the money. On the other hand, am a civic leader." He spread his hands wide. "I am offering a guarantee for Luna's safety, a simple exchange." He tapped a signature page. "You will sign over your controlling shares in the Nova Aquifer project, all of them, to the holding company specified, the Aurelius Trust. The aquifer is for the data centers. Then," Seraphin stated, it was not a question, "progress requires resources. Don Quaid, the port needs those data centers, and they, in turn, happen to need an immense amount of water for cooling. The Nova Aquifer project was designed by my father as a drought relief fail-safe for Southern California. It is not a slush fund for you and Aurelius to launder." Seraphin's voice was dangerously low. Price laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Drought relief, how very noble. You cannot afford nobility tonight." Marisol's gaze, sharpened by panic, drifted from the men. Her eyes scanned the table, looking for any advantage, any escape. Her focus snagged on the documents, not the contracts, but what was holding them down, a thick, rolled set of blueprints, bound with a rubber band, serving as a paperweight. She knew those drawings. She had wiped coffee rings off the glass frame that held them. Every Tuesday and Thursday, in the Solstice Tower building manager's office, Solstice Residences, Floodgate Mechanics, Level P3. Calloway, the nervous manager who had borrowed her master key card, the mole was not just a low-level guard. He was management. He had not just given them access. He had given them the building's vital infrastructure. Her hand, still damp with rain, slipped into her pocket. Her fingers found the cheap burner phone. She navigated the screen by touch alone, her eyes never leaving Price. She found the voice memo icon. She pressed record. "What if I refuse?" Seraphin asked, stalling for time. Marisol took a half-step sideways. "Sir, your shoulder," she whispered, her voice trembling just enough to be convincing. "You are bleeding on the floor." She moved toward the table, as if to find something to help him. Her eyes landed on a box of tissues. Price's gaze dismissed her. "If you refuse," he said, focusing on Seraphin, "this stops being a pleasant negotiation. You seem to think Helios is the threat. They are just the how. The why is Director Cordelia Vane at the DFI." As Marisol reached for the tissues, her other hand, the one with the phone, deftly slipped it into the box's opening, tucking it beneath the top layers of tissue. The microphone aimed perfectly outward. It was a cleaner's trick, hiding things in plain sight. "Director Vane," Price continued, savoring the moment, "is prepared to open a transnational organized crime investigation into the Quaid Consortium, RICO statutes, asset seizure, sanctions, everything by sunrise. Your port logistics will be frozen. Your medical supplies will rot on the docks, and you, Seraphin, will be erased. All she needs is my signal." The threat was absolute, a clean, legal execution. Then Seraphine did something that shocked Marisol. He smiled. It was a cold, tired, almost pitying smile. "You are late, Alden, 4 years late." Price's own smile faltered. "My father ran that organization. I do not—" Seraphin pushed himself to his full height, the pain in his shoulder sharpening his posture. "The Quaid Consortium has been legally clean for 48 months. We deal in cold chain logistics, medical freight, floating solar arrays. The organization Director Vane wants to bust does not exist. A jury will believe whatever she tells them," Price hissed. "This is the moral rift. Alden, my father built his legacy in the shadows. I am trying to build one in the light, and you are the ones dragging the city back into the dark to power your servers." The floodlights overhead flickered once, twice, then they died, plunging the vast church into a terrifying darkness, lit only by the faint green glow of the exit signs. "Evo." "What is this?" Price yelled, his voice suddenly stripped of its polish. The sound of shattering glass was explosive. The tall, wind-stained glass windows along the north side of the nave blew inward, not from a bomb, but from synchronized pneumatic rams. The night air, fresh and cold, flooded the dusty space. "Get them," Price commanded. His detectives fumbled, turning on tactical flashlights, the beams cutting chaotic patterns through the airborne dust. From the darkness of the rafters, a black nylon cable dropped, its harness and ascender motor landing with a soft metallic click, perfectly between Seraphin and Marisol. "Go," Seraphin ordered, shoving Marisol toward it. "Clip in, now." She grabbed the heavy carabiner, her cold fingers clumsy, and snapped it onto the front of her coveralls. Seraphin clipped his own line just below hers. The detectives opened fire. The sound of the shots was deafening in the enclosed space, plaster and ancient wood splintering from the pews where they had been standing. Seraphin grabbed the ascender's handle. "Hold on." The motor engaged, a high-torque whine, and yanked them violently off the floor. As they ascended into the darkness of the roof beams, Marisol looked down. Price was at the table, his face a mask of rage, his hand grabbing the tissue box, feeling the weight of the phone inside. "No," Marisol snarled. Her eyes darted. On the wall near the altar was a small, automated air freshener, the kind she replaced the citrus scent cartridges for every week. It was battery-operated, its motion sensor aimed at the aisle. It was running, hissing out a small puff of spray. She still had the industrial aerosol can of deodorant from her housekeeping cart, hooked to her belt, odor eliminator high-volume citrus blast. She aimed and sprayed a solid 3-second stream directly into the whirring motor of the small plastic air freshener, soaking the electronics in flammable, aerosolized citrus oils. The motor sparked. It was not a bomb. It was a whoosh. A bright orange fireball erupted from the wall, instantly incinerating the tissue box and the phone. It was followed by a thick, acrid, suffocating cloud of burnt orange peel smoke. Price and his men staggered back, coughing, their eyes streaming, blinded by the sudden, bizarrely fragrant fog. By the time the smoke cleared, Marisol and Seraphin were gone, disappearing through the bell tower hatch. They heard Price's voice, raw with fury, screaming up into the night from the smoke-filled church. "Forget Quaid. Get the cleaning lady." The safe house was not a house. It was a sterile, glass box perched high on the cliffs of Palos Verdes, invisible from the road below. Ivo had deposited them there, his face grim, and then melted back into the pre-dawn shadows to manage the fallout. Now, they were alone. The wind howled outside, a high, thin sound that emphasized the silence within. Seraphin sat on the edge of a severe black sofa, his jacket gone, his shirt a ruin of torn, stiffened fabric. The fever had set in, a dangerous flush high on his cheekbones, and his skin was slick with a cold sweat. The wound, when Marisol inspected it under the glare of a halogen lamp, was angry, inflamed, and still weeping blood. "It is infected," she said. Her voice was not the voice of the maid. It was the quiet, clipped tone of the nursing student she had once been. Ivo had left a military-grade trauma kit on the polished concrete counter. She found antiseptic wash, butterfly closures, and a sterile suture kit. Her hands, which had been so steady with the industrial chemicals and the improvised explosives, were trembling. She clenched them, took a deep breath, and willed them still. "This will hurt," she warned. "Do it," he replied, his voice rough. She cleaned the wound, her touch firm, efficient, he hissed, a sharp intake of breath that was the only sound he made, his entire body rigid. She had to lean in, her face only inches from his, to see the needle clearly. The proximity was suffocating. She could feel the waves of heat rolling off his skin, the furnace of his fever. The air was thick with the scent of him, not just the metallic tang of blood, but a clean, sharp smell of soap and the underlying, salty trace of the ocean. Her own hair, still damp from the rain, brushed his uninjured shoulder. She made the first stitch, his body locked, a tremor of pure agony running through him. She paused, her hand hovering. "Keep talking," she whispered, her voice tight. "Distract yourself." He opened his eyes. They were dark, dilated with pain, and utterly focused on her. "I chose not to retaliate," he ground out, his words forced, many times. She pushed the needle through again. "What do you mean?" "My father, his way was simple. Blood for blood. When I took over the consortium, I stopped it. He breathed heavily. I moved us legitimate. I refused to spill blood. I let insults from men like Price slide." He closed his eyes, a sheen of sweat on his brow. "They see mercy as weakness. And now, I pay the price." Marisol pulled the third stitch tight, her movements becoming smoother, the muscle memory from 2 years of clinical rotations returning. "Choosing to protect other people is never wrong," she said, her voice quiet but fierce. "It is just more expensive." She finished, her fingers brushing his skin as she taped the sterile gauze pad in place. Her touch lingered for a second too long. His good hand came up, not to stop her, but to cover hers. His fingers, long and warm, wrapped around her own. It was not a caress, but an anchor. "Thank you," he murmured. She did not pull away. The night had fully settled, and through the vast glass wall, the lights of the container ships far below looked like a scattered constellation on the black water. The storm was over. "You cleaned motel rooms when you were a child," he stated. She froze, her hand still in his. "How did you know that?" "Your hands," he said, "and the way you handled those chemicals at the tower, the way you knew the building. You have been invisible your whole life." "My mother," she said, her voice distant. "We moved from motel to motel. She cleaned, I helped." "They say I used to sleep in the train stations in Marseille," he offered, his gaze fixed on the distant lights. "Did you—" "I do not remember," he said, "but the rumor is useful." He turned his head on the sofa, his eyes finding hers again. The fever, the blood loss, the shared danger it had burned away the dawn, leaving only the man, Marisol. He said her name as if it was the first time. She should have moved back. She should have established the distance again. But she was trapped in his gaze. He moved, shifting his weight, the pain eclipsed by something else. He leaned in. He kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of desperation and profound recognition. It was slow and deep, a drowning man's last breath. His lips were hot from the fever, chapped and tasting of salt. Her heart, which had been hammering with fear, now hammered with something else entirely, a heavy, frantic beat against her ribs. Her hands came up, not to push him away, but to steady herself, landing on his uninjured shoulder. She could feel the hard, lean muscle beneath her palms, his good arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer, molding her against his side. His other hand, the injured one, came up to her face, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was hesitant, almost reverent. The kiss deepened, and her breath hitched. It was a silent, desperate conversation. His arm at her waist tightened, but his hand went no lower. Her hand stayed on his shoulders. The bronze St. Brendan charm, still hanging from her neck, swung free and came to rest on his bare chest. The contact of the cool metal against his hot skin made him shudder. A low sound vibrating in his chest. Her own body responded, a tremor running through her. This was a line, a dangerous, beautiful line. A thin, tinny sound shattered the moment, a cartoon theme song. Marisol ripped herself away, her body instantly cold. Luna. She scrambled for her burner phone, left on the counter. The screen glowed with her daughter's name. Seraphin watched her, his face a mask of pain and something she could not name. He did not try to stop her. He gave her the space, his gaze fixed on her, a mixture of raw hunger and a sudden, sharp respect. Luna Marisol's voice was shaking. "Baby, are you okay?" Static hissed on the line. "Mommy, I am scared." The knocking stopped. "Where are you? Are you hidden?" "In the pantry. Mommy," Luna's voice was a terrified whisper. "Miss Cabrera she is asleep on the floor. She will not wake up." Marisol's blood turned to ice. "Luna, listen to me." "She left a note, Mommy." The sound of paper crackling. Before the knocking, she left it on the counter. It says, "Go with the trusted person to the Blue Lantern shelter." And she signed it. But it is not her name. "What does it say, baby? What is the signature?" "It is a drawing," Luna whispered. "A little bird, a bluebird." Blue Lantern, bluebird, a code. Someone else was in play, but Miss Cabrera was down. Helios was still there. She hung up, her mind racing. She looked at Seraphin. They heard her. "Miss Cabrera. She is unconscious. My daughter is alone, hiding." Seraphin was already on his feet, his pain shoved aside by a new urgency. Evo is circling the building. He can execute the noon bell extraction, but he needs a clean destination, the shelter. It is a risk. We do not know who Bluebird is. He shook his head, already thinking. No, not a shelter. I have a place. Rancho Mirage, a pediatric recovery center. It specializes in asthma. I fund it. It is secure, off-grid. Evo can have her there in 2 hours. Marisol's response was visceral, immediate. No, I am not sending my daughter into the desert with a stranger. Evo is not a stranger. He is my hand. He is a stranger to me. She is my daughter." Marisol looked at the glass wall. The black sky was softening, turning a deep, bruised purple. Morning was coming. She turned back to Seraphine. Her decision absolute. "I go with her. Ivo gets us both out. We go to Rancho Mirage. Together." She was no longer the maid he had propositioned. She was setting the terms. "I will go with her, this morning." The question he had asked hours ago, "Will you stay till morning?" finally had its answer. It was not a surrender. It was a declaration. Seraphine held her gaze, the memory of the kiss still hot in the air. He nodded slowly. "This morning." The sun was a brutal white eye over the Mojave as the convoy pushed east on Highway 91. 3 identical white vans, stenciled with the logo for Otis Elevator Service, moved in a tight, professional formation. They were, to any observer, just contractors heading for a job in the desert. Inside the lead van, it was silent. This was not a service van. It was a Zephyr, an armored electric vehicle with a non-reflective, radar-dampening shell. Seraphine was driving, his movements economical, his focus absolute. His shoulder, tightly bound, was a block of rigid pain. In the back, Marisol held Luna. Her daughter was wrapped in a thermal blanket, her eyes wide, clutching the bronze St. Brendan charm in her small fist. The extraction from the apartment had been a terrifying blur, executed by Seraphine's man, Ivo, with silent, violent efficiency. Miss Cabrera was stable. An ambulance anonymously summoned, but Luna was in shock. Marisol rocked her, humming a tune from her own childhood, a Spanish lullaby about a sleeping girl and the moon. Duérmete mi niña, duérmete mi sol. The soft, slow melody was a fragile defense against the hum of the tires and the tension vibrating from the man in the front seat. High above them, a faint shimmer in the heat haze betrayed the presence of a stealth drone. It was tracking them, a patient, digital predator. "Now, Ivo," Seraphine said, not to them but to a microphone in his cuff. On the freeway, the other 2 vans suddenly accelerated, boxing out a tractor trailer. The third van, the one behind the Zephyr, abruptly took the Indian truck trail exit, its transponder suddenly blazing with a signal designed to mimic Seraphine's own secure beacon. The drone locked onto the false signal, veered sharply south, following the decoy. "It took the bait," Seraphine said. "Who is in that van?" Marisol asked, her voice tight. "No one," Seraphine replied. "It is remote piloted, but Helios will not be the only ones watching. Price's masters at the Mayo-CC will have ground assets." As if summoned by his words, 2 black SUVs, civilian models, crested a rise behind the decoy van, disappearing down the same dusty trail. "Price's men," Seraphine noted, his eyes on his own dash-mounted display. "Helios hunts from the sky. Mayock hunts from the ground. They are not coordinated. They just share a target." They drove on, the Zephyr now just another vehicle on the long, straight road. They reached the Chino Hills Pass. Far to their right, on the parallel road, a plume of fire and black smoke erupted into the clean, desert sky. A concussive, distant thump vibrated through their chassis. The decoy. Marisol flinched, her lullaby cut short. She stared at the rising smoke. They just blew it up. A wave of nausea, cold and acidic, rose in her throat. The reality of the night, of the men who had been shot, of this execution, hit her. Seraphine glanced at her in the rearview mirror. His expression was unreadable, carved from stone. "My people are not paid, Miss Trent. They are protected. The man who organized this decoy has a son in medical school on a full Quaid scholarship. His family is now secure for life. They know the risks. We trade in loyalty, not wages." His cold, brutal pragmatism chilled her more than the explosion. 2 hours later, they arrived at Rancho Mirage. The facility was beautiful, a low-slung terracotta building set against the stark mountains. All clean lines and desert landscaping. It was also locked. The digital keypad on the staff entrance was dark. Seraphine waved his own access card. Nothing. He pulled out the industrial phone he had used at the tower and ran a diagnostic. The screen flashed. A faint, encrypted signal was broadcasting from inside. "Aurelius, Aurelius, Aurelius." "It is a trap," Seraphin said, stepping back from the door. Price knew about this place. The dry desert air, combined with the stress, was too much. Luna, silent for hours, suddenly coughed. It was not a normal cough. It was a tight, dry, barking sound that sealed Marisol's throat with panic. The wheeze. "Her inhaler," Marisol said, digging frantically in the go bag Evo had packed. It was not there. No. Her portable nebulizer? I did not have time to pack it. Luna's breaths became short, shallow gasps. Seraphin did not hesitate. He moved to a utility shed 20 feet from the main building. It was also locked. He ripped the electrical meter from the wall and, ignoring the small shower of sparks, manipulated the wires within. The shed's steel door clicked open. Inside was a backup supply closet. He emerged a moment later with a sealed plastic kit. "Pediatric steroid for nebulization," he said. Snapping it open, he handed her the mask and the albuterol vial. Marisol's hands shook as she assembled the battery-powered nebulizer, her nursing training kicking in. "It is okay, mija. Breathe the smoke. Just like at home, breathe the smoke." Luna cried, but she breathed. The harsh, terrifying wheeze began to soften. That was when the headlights flooded the compound. 4 black, unmarked vans, the same type from the church, rolled in, blocking the only exit. The Helios task force had arrived, not fooled by the decoy for long. "The roof," Seraphin said, grabbing the medical kit. He pushed Marisol and Luna toward a maintenance ladder. They scrambled up, emerging onto the flat, gravel-covered roof. They were exposed, a perfect target in the twilight. Below, doors opened, and men in dark tactical gear began to deploy. Marisol looked around, desperate. The lights of Palm Springs glittered in the valley below. High overhead, the red and green lights of a commercial jet descended toward the airport. An idea, insane and brilliant, seized her. She looked at the polished, mirrored glass solar panels lining the edge of the roof. She ran to the nearest one, a heavy, decorative panel mounted on the parapet. She smashed it with the empty oxygen tank from the nebulizer kit. "What are you doing?" Seraphin yelled. She grabbed a large, curved shard of the mirrored glass. She aimed it not at the men below, but at the sky, toward the descending airplane. "SOS, SOS," her hand, slick with sweat, flashed the dying sunlight in the universal code, ... dash, 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 ... "They cannot see that," Seraphin started to say. "They do not have to," she shot back. "Not stopping. That is the approach path for PSP. It is restricted airspace. They will see an unauthorized signal. They have to report it." 3 minutes later, a new sound. A helicopter. Not police, but a local news chopper, its searchlight snapping on, drawn by the public chatter from air traffic control about a potential emergency signal at the quarantined medical facility. The Helios team below froze. Their movements became uncertain. They were contractors, deniable assets. Their entire operation depended on the dark. Now, a spotlight was painting their vehicles. The thwack, thwack, thwack of a different kind of weapon echoed from the ridge behind them. Paint. Phosphorescent green paint splattered across the windshields of the Helios vans, blinding them, marking them. Evo. This way, Seraphin grabbed Marisol's arm, pulling her and Luna toward the far side of the roof. An irrigation ditch, deep and wide, ran from the property line down into the valley. They half slid, half fell into the ditch, landing in 6 inches of cold, muddy water. They ran, concealed by the concrete walls as the sounds of confusion shouting, the news chopper's blades, the whine of Evo's ATVs erupted behind them. They did not stop running for a mile. Finally, huddled behind a concrete aqueduct, Seraphin looked at Marisol. She was covered in mud, her hair matted, her face streaked with grime. She was still holding Luna, who had fallen asleep, her breathing finally even. The Don, the man who commanded a logistical empire, looked at the exhausted cleaning lady. His gaze was stripped of all pretense. The gratitude for the rescue at the tower was gone, replaced by a raw, startling respect. She was not a victim. She was not a pawn. She was a combatant. Evo worked fast. The clue left by the terrified babysitter, Blue Lantern Shelter, was the key. Within an hour, Evo, operating from a mobile command van parked under a freeway overpass, had broken it. The Blue Lantern was not a shelter. It was a defunct shell corporation from the 1990s, its only remaining asset. Its single-line item in the state database was a long-term, prepaid lease on a cold storage vault in El Segundo. The vault was located in a data fortress, a gray, anonymous building that housed the digital secrets of aerospace contractors and, as Evo discovered, the Aurelius Trust. This was the nexus. This was where Price and Vane kept the contracts for the Nova Aquifer and the digital receipts for Helios. "It is a fortress," Evo said, his face illuminated by 3 screens, biometrics, air-gap network, armed guards. "We cannot get in." "They can," Seraphin said, looking at Marisol. "We cannot, but a safety inspector can." The plan was audacious. Born of desperation and Marisol's unique expertise, they called it Laundry Day. At 4:40 p.m. the next day, Marisol Trent walked into the lobby of the El Segundo data fortress. She was no longer the mud-streaked survivor. She wore a crisp navy blue polo shirt with an embroidered logo for Industrial Safety Solutions. Her hair in a tight bun, a clipboard in her hand, the ID badge, perfectly cloned by Evo, announced her as a regional supervisor. She looked bored, efficient, and completely invisible. She was there to conduct a surprise audit of the janitorial closets, citing a recent OSHA complaint. The guards, used to a parade of contractors, barely glanced at her. She found the 3rd-floor utility closet, right above the Aurelius vault. She had one tool, a gallon container of industrial-grade ammonia. She unscrewed the cap, poured a third of it onto the concrete floor, and wedged the container behind a drain pipe. She took a small breath freshener vial from her pocket and sprayed it, masking the first sharp fumes. Then, she walked calmly to the main corridor and pulled the fire alarm. The building's protocol took over. Alarms blared, not for a fire, but for a chemical alert. The 3rd floor, and the 2 floors below it, began a mandatory evacuation. In the chaos, Seraphin, who had been waiting in a hijacked freight elevator, moved. He used the evacuation stairwell to access the ventilation crawl space, positioning himself directly above the server room. Marisol did not evacuate. She walked toward the spill, holding a wet rag to her face, yelling at fleeing office workers to move calmly to the west exits. As the server room emptied, Evo made his move. He was not in the building. He was parked in a broadcast van 2 blocks away. He routed a signal through the building's compromised PA system. It was not an announcement. It was a high-frequency, layered audio tone, broadcast only into the server room. It was a classic air-gap jump, the server's own high-fidelity microphones, designed to listen for signs of mechanical failure, picked up the audio, interpreted it as code, and a worm tunneled its way into the secure network. From the ventilation shaft, Seraphin watched the download begin, the data siphoning from the Aurelius mainframe onto his hardened device. The files confirmed everything. He saw the authorization, signed by Director Cordelia Vane, waiving the environmental reviews for Nova Aquifer. He saw the wire transfers, millions disguised as educational grants, from Aurelius Trust to Alden Price's personal foundation. He saw the Helios invoices. They were billing the MAOIC for counter-terrorism training exercises. But the dates and GPS coordinates matched 3 different unsolved assaults on Port Authority Union members. Then, he found a different folder. Risk Management, Internal. He opened it. The file contained surveillance photos of a man, thin and worried-looking, driving a delivery van. File name Ethan Rowe. Seraphin's blood ran cold. He knew that name. It was the name Marisol had written on Luna's birth certificate. The file detailed how Helios had coerced Ethan, leveraging old debts, forcing him to act as an informant on the docks, but he had been sloppy. His final assignment, the one that broke him, was an order to plant a GPS tracker on a school bus, a bus that carried the children of several city officials who opposed the Nova Aquifer deal. Ethan had refused. He had taken the tracker, panicked, and vanished. He had not just abandoned his family, he had been running for his life. A new alarm blared. Not the chemical alert, this was the real one. A silent trace in Evo's worm had been tripped. Red lights flashed. Heavy steel security doors slammed down at both ends of the corridor, trapping Seraphin in the utility spine and Marisol in the evacuation zone. She was trapped. The exit stairwell was sealed. She ran back, her heart in her throat. Seraphin dropped from the vent above, landing silently beside her. They know. We are locked in. Marisol looked around, her mind racing. They were in a service corridor, and parked in a charging alcove, identical to the one at Solstice, was an autonomous floor scrubber. Next to it sat a spare 300-pound battery pack on a charger. The floor, she panted, pointing, the sensor. The door was held by a magnetic lock, but it was reinforced by a pressure sensor in the floor plate, designed to prevent it from closing on a cart. She grabbed the handle of the wheeled battery caddy. Seraphin understood. They both shoved the massive battery pack, rolling it off its caddy. It crashed onto the floor sensor plate with a sickening crunch of plastic and metal. The sensor, overwhelmed by the weight and the impact, registered a catastrophic failure. Its default, per fire code, was to release. The magnetic lock at the far end of the hall clicked open. They ran, bursting through the door just as the first Helios operatives arrived on the floor. They did not look back. They hit the main stairwell, merging with the last dregs of the evacuating office workers. It was 5:00. They were just two more tired employees, heads down, walking out of the lobby and into the parking garage, blending into the rush hour crowd. They were almost to Evo's van when a figure stepped from between two parked cars. Marisol. She froze. The voice was a ghost. She turned. Ethan Rowe. He was thinner than she remembered, his eyes hollow with fear. I knew they would come here, he stammered, his hands shaking. I have been watching them. I knew they would try to erase the backups. Seraphin moved, placing himself between Marisol and the man, his hand on his weapon. No, please, Ethan pleaded, ignoring Seraphin. His eyes locked on Marisol. They took everything from me. I have one thing left. He held up a small, black hard drive. I copied their black book before I ran. All their real clients, all their orders. It is everything, please. Just let me help. I need to know she is safe. I need to know my daughter is safe. Seraphin was rigid, assessing the new variable, the new threat. But Marisol looked past Seraphin, at the man who was Luna's father. He was not a threat. He was just as broken as she was. Okay, Ethan, she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. Okay, we will take your help. The houseboat rocked gently on the black water of the marina, the rhythmic lapping of the tide against the hull the only sound. It was a borrowed pocket of peace in a city that had tried to kill them. In the tiny forward berth, Luna was fast asleep, exhausted, the bronze St. Brendan charm clutched in her small, limp hand. In the main cabin, the three adults formed a tense triangle. Ethan sat at the fold-down table, the black hard drive placed between them like a grenade. Seraphin stood, his injured arm in a fresh sling, his presence filling the small space. Marisol stood between them, the bridge between her past and her future. It was a setup, Ethan said, his voice raw. He had not stopped talking since Evo had vetted him and brought him aboard. Helios did not just let me go, they pushed me. He explained how they had manufactured the debt, how they had leveraged his fear, how the order to plant a tracker on the school bus was a loyalty test he was designed to fail. They wanted me to run, he whispered, his eyes finding Marisol's. It made me a ghost. It made me the deadbeat who abandoned his family. It gave them a legal, justifiable reason to monitor you, to lean on you. If I ever surfaced, they could use you and Luna to control me. They were building a cage for all of us. He pushed the drive forward. This is the black book. I copied it before I ran. It is my only insurance. I kept it to buy Luna's freedom. Seraphine's voice was cold, devoid of sympathy. You will not buy anything. You will earn it. Ethan flinched. You will hand that drive to Evo, now, Seraphine commanded. You will be taken to an independent law firm, one of my choosing. You will sit with them, and you will sign an affidavit. You will testify, under oath, to everything you know. You are a material witness, Ethan, not a negotiator. He took a step closer. If you follow these instructions, you will be protected by the law. If you try to run, if you lie, if you betray this one chance, I will not send killers. Seraphine's voice dropped, becoming infinitely heavier. I will send the U.S. Marshals. I will use the full, crushing weight of the legal system to put you in a federal prison for the rest of your natural life. We are done with the shadows. Marisol watched them. Ethan, the father of her child, a man defined by his fear, his entire life spent running, and Seraphine, a Dawn, a man of absolute power, but one who was actively, painfully trying to chain that power to the law. She knew her choice. She looked at Ethan. You will do it. For her. Hours later, the truce was set. Ethan was on the small outer deck, under the watchful eye of one of Evo's men. Luna was breathing deeply in the berth. The crisis, for a moment, was stable. Marisol was in the galley, a kitchen barely larger than a closet, her hands shaking as she poured coffee. The adrenaline was finally leaving her system, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. She felt Seraphine before she heard him. He stepped into the galley behind her, and the small space became charged, the air thick. He did not touch her, but she could feel the heat from his body, his presence a solid wall at her back. Slowly, she turned. It was so close. His good hand came up, not to grab, but to gently brush her cheek, his thumb rubbing away a streak of grime she had not known was there. You were incredible today, he murmured. She leaned into the touch, her eyes closing, a long, shuddering breath escaping her. It was the first time in 36 hours she had not been in motion. He drew her in, his good arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. It was not a tentative hold. It was an anchor. She rested her forehead against his collarbone, her hands coming up to rest flat on his chest, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart. He lowered his head, his lips brushing her hair, then her temple. They used our children, he whispered, his voice a low growl of fury. They used the things we love against us. He pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes. No one ever gets to use our children as leverage again. He kissed her. It was not the fevered, desperate kiss from the safe house. This was warm, slow, and absolute. It was a claim. It was the sealing of a vow. It tasted of coffee and salt air. And for a full minute, there was no Helios, no price, no past. There was only the solid wall of his chest and the promise in his kiss. She pulled back, her breath shaky but her mind clear. I do not just want to be safe. Seraphine, I want to build something. He looked at her, confused. My whole life, I have been cleaning up messes, other people's messes. I am done. Her voice gained strength. I am going to start my own company. Trent Clean and Safe. I will hire women like me, single mothers, immigrants. I will not just teach them to clean. I will teach them safety, hazardous materials handling, corporate security awareness, their labor rights. I will make them visible. The look in his eyes changed from affection to a piercing, profound respect. He saw a partner. That is brilliant, he said. You will need startup capital. I will provide it. She tensed, pulling back. I cannot be a silent partner, he finished. Understanding instantly, zero control, 100% faith. It is your company, Marisol. Your rules. I will simply be your first investor. A secure tablet on the counter chimed, a sharp, intrusive sound, a message from Evo. It was a link to a press advisory that had just hit the city's news desks. Director Cordelia Vane, Directorate for Federal Integrity, 10 a.m., Los Angeles City Hall. Subject: the dismantling of a transnational criminal organization. She's doing it, Seraphin said, his voice flat and cold. She's going on the record. She's going to declare me a public enemy. She's using a stage, Marisol said, her new resolve hardening into steel. She looked at the two hard drives on the table, Ethan's black book and the data from the Aurelius vault. So we will build a bigger one. Evo, Seraphin said, speaking to his comms, we do not just leak this, we time it. I want a public livestream set up, independent of the press pool, and I want these files delivered by bonded courier to the Urban Justice Office and the State Water Commission at 10:01 a.m. Exactly. He looked at Marisol. Vane will be there in her suit, wrapped in the flag, backed by the DFI. They will be expecting me to respond with lawyers. They are not getting you, Marisol said, stepping away from him, her posture no longer that of a woman being protected, but of one preparing for battle. They are getting me. Marisol, no, it is too dangerous. Who has more right, she demanded, her eyes flashing. They used my ID to start this. They hunted my daughter. They want to talk about cleaning up the city. I am the cleaner. I am the one who knows where all the dirt is. They want a clean city. I will give them one. Clean water, clean contracts, and clean power. The air on the steps of Los Angeles City Hall was a circus of media. At precisely 10 a.m., Cordelia Vane, director of the DFI, stepped up to a podium bristling with microphones. She was the picture of federal authority, her suit a severe navy blue, the flags of the nation and the state flanking her. Good morning, she began, her voice crisp, amplified. I am here today to announce a multi-agency operation to dismantle a transnational criminal organization that has, for decades, poisoned the logistics of this great port. She was drowned out, not by a heckler, but by a broadcast. Across the plaza, on the steps of the public library, a second, smaller crowd had gathered. In its center stood Marisol Trent, holding a smartphone on a gimbal. A portable screen behind her, powered by a battery pack, had just flickered to life. The feed was raw, unpolished, and streaming live on a channel Evo had created just 1 hour before We Deserve Clean. My name is Marisol Trent, she said, her voice shaking but carrying, amplified by her own small speaker. I am a cleaner, and Director Vane is lying to you. The media pool swiveled, a confused beast, turning its cameras toward the new show. Vane's face tightened. Miss Vane is here to talk about crime, Marisol continued, her viewership numbers exploding online as thousands joined the feed. So let's talk about this. The screen behind her lit up with the Aurelius Black Book. It was not a summary. It was the data itself. Scanned wire transfers from the Aurelius Trust to Alden Price's Educational Foundation. Invoices from Helios, billing the city for anti-terrorism training on the exact dates that union members opposing Price had been hospitalized. And then, the final file, the architectural map of the Nova Aquifer, showing the proposed public pipelines. Overlaid in red was a second, hidden map, a direct, massive pipeline diverting 70% of the water to a series of black site data centers owned by Aurelius. This is not public safety, Marisol declared, her voice ringing out. This is a theft. They are stealing our water to cool their private servers, and they are using a federal contractor to silence anyone who gets in their way. Cordelia Vane smiled, a thin, cold gesture. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to her security detail. 4 men in dark suits, their Helios lapel pins glinting, broke from the crowd. They moved quickly, not toward Vane, but toward Marisol. Ma'am, their leader said, his voice loud for the cameras. You are under arrest for disseminating classified information and compromising national water security. They grabbed her arms. Get your hands off her. Seraphin Quaid stepped through the crowd, his suit immaculate, his injured arm in a simple black sling. He was flanked by 2 men Marisol did not recognize, who looked like very expensive lawyers. He did not look at the Helios men. He addressed the uniformed LAPD captain standing nearby. "Captain," Seraphin said, his voice calm and clear. He held out a single, signed document. "This is an emergency injunction from the Urban Justice Office, effective as of 9 a.m. this morning. It freezes all assets and suspends all operational licenses for Helios Task Force and the Metropolitan Anti-Organized Crime Council, pending a federal investigation." The captain read the order. His face went pale. He looked at the Helios men, whose hands were still on Marisol. "Son," the captain said, "you are now a civilian. You touch her again, and you will be the one I arrest. Stand down, all of you." The Helios team froze, their authority vanishing in an instant. It was too much for Alden Price. He stood on the edge of the crowd, his face gray, his money was frozen, his protection was gone, he was ruined. He shrieked, his voice cracking, his eyes wild. He pulled a small silver pistol from his jacket. "You did this." He aimed at Marisol. Chaos! The crowd screamed, scrambling, but before Price could fire, Ethan Rowe, who had been standing at the back, surged forward. He shoved Marisol, pushing her out of the line of fire. The gun went off. The sound was a flat, ugly crack. Ethan cried out, stumbling, clutching his side. The bullet had torn through his jacket, a glancing wound, but he was down. Price tried to aim again. He was too slow. Seraphin moved, not like a businessman, but like a predator. He crossed the space in 2 steps. He did not punch Price. He did not shoot him. He seized the man's wrist, his grip like steel, and twisted. A sickening snap of bone echoed, and the pistol clattered to the granite. Seraphin kicked it away, his vow of no blood, broken only by the man he was trying to save, held. On the houseboat in the marina, Luna watched the chaotic, screaming feed on Evo's tablet. She saw her mother fall. She saw her father clutch his side. She squeezed the bronze St. Brendan charm, her knuckles white, tears streaming down her face. "Mommy," she whispered. "Mommy, come on." In the confusion, Cordelia Vane was already moving. She was not a fighter. She was a bureaucrat. She slipped through the side door of City Hall, her Helios detail forming a wedge around her. "She is running," Marisol yelled, scrambling up from the pavement. Seraphin saw it. "Evo, she is heading for the garage." On Spring Avenue, the street in front of the garage exit, 2 Helios vans suddenly swerved, deploying a mobile spike strip, blocking the road, a clean getaway. Marisol grabbed Seraphin's hand. "They will be in the politician's elevator. It is too fast. We cannot stop her." "Yes, we can." Marisol's eyes were bright, focused. "I know this building. I cleaned this building." She pulled him toward a service door marked Utility Access. Code is 1421. It is the janitor's birthday. She punched it in. The lock clicked. She pulled him into a dark concrete tunnel filled with pipes and the smell of ozone. "This is the main conduit. It runs straight under the building. It lets out by the P4 garage entrance. We can beat her there." They ran, their footsteps echoing in the dark. Cordelia Vane's black SUV sped down the internal parking ramp. The driver saw the exit gate, still 50 yards away, and accelerated. Clang, clang, clang! A heavy, corrugated steel emergency gate slammed down, sealing the exit. The SUV shrieked to a halt, inches from the barrier. Marisol and Seraphin stepped out of a utility closet, blocking the SUV from behind. Vane was trapped. The tinted rear window of the SUV hissed down. Cordelia Vane stared at Marisol, her face perfectly calm, her composure absolute. "You have made a very serious mistake, Miss Trent." "You are under arrest," Vane, Seraphin said. "Am I?" Vane smiled. "You have no authority here. All you have done is trap yourselves with me. And you," she said, her eyes locking on Marisol, "have a child, Luna, an 8-year-old girl, currently in the care of a known criminal associate whose father is a fugitive witness and whose mother is now a domestic terrorist." She leaned forward. "You will give me those hard drives. You will retract everything, or I will make one call, and Luna will be in the state protective system by noon. You will never see her again." It was her final weapon, the full, cold power of the state. Marisol's hand was shaking. She was holding her phone. It was still streaming. 10,000 people were watching this dark, grainy feed from a parking garage. She stepped forward, pushing the phone's camera lens through the open window, inches from Vane's face. "You just threatened my daughter," Marisol said, her voice dead calm, vibrating with pure, cold rage. "You just admitted to extortion, live, in front of tens of thousands of people. You are done." Cordelia Vane's perfectly composed face fractured, the realization that her threat, her final ace, had been broadcast live, struck her mute. In the echoing silence of the parking garage, they heard new sounds, not the tactical bootsteps of Helios, but the heavy, authoritative tread of organized, legitimate force. Agents from the Urban Justice Office, backed by the State Attorney General's task force, flooded the garage entrance, their weapons held low, their authority absolute. "Director Cordelia Vane," the lead agent announced, his voice booming in the concrete space. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, extortion, and violation of federal ethics." Upstairs, on the plaza, the live cameras captured the corresponding move. As Alden Price was being treated by paramedics for his broken wrist, the LAPD captain, now holding the UJO injunction, formally cuffed him. "Alden Price, you are being detained on behalf of the Attorney General's office. The remaining Helios operatives, their authority dissolved, were disarmed and cuffed one by one. Their downfall streamed on every major news network. The state officially revoked their operating license, effective immediately." The knot had been cut. In the days that followed, the city's corrupt infrastructure collapsed. The Nova Aquifer project was seized by the state and converted into a public utility trust, its charter rewritten to prioritize hospitals and schools first. The Quaid Consortium, in exchange for Seraphin's full cooperation and the submission of the Aurelius Black Book, received conditional immunity. Seraphin's clean logistics network was deemed vital, but his father's shadowy empire was permanently dismantled, its assets forfeited to a victims' restitution fund. Ethan Rowe survived his wound. True to Seraphin's word, he was given legal counsel, not assassins. He testified fully, his evidence corroborating Marisol's and sealing the case against Price. For his cooperation, he received a reduced sentence and, more importantly to Marisol, a structured legal right to supervised visitation with his daughter once he had served his time. Marisol had faced her past, not with vengeance, but with the unyielding force of law and mercy. 4 months later, a new logo was being painted on the side of a van Trent clean and safe. With startup capital from a community reinvestment fund which Seraphin had anonymously endowed, Marisol launched her company. Her first major contract, won through a competitive and transparent bidding process, was the City of Los Angeles. She was now in charge of security-cleared sanitation for City Hall. The woman they tried to frame was now the one ensuring the building remained clean. The fall air was crisp, the sky a perfect, cloudless blue. On the 50-yard line of the Thunder Pasadena Stadium, Luna, now 9, tossed a football in a high, wobbly arc. She was laughing, her breath clear. Seraphin, his sling long gone, caught the ball. He tossed it back, his movements easy. "Good throw. Now remember what we practiced," he said, his voice calm. "When you feel the air get tight, you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. You control the air. Luna, it does not control you." Marisol watched from the bleachers, a quiet smile on her face. This was Luna's dream. This was the peace they had earned. That night, they stood on the repaired rooftop of the Solstice Tower, the place where it had all begun. The wind off the Pacific was cool, and the lights of the port glittered below, a sprawling galaxy of commerce and life. "Ivo sent his final report," Seraphin said quietly, standing beside her. "Is it over?" she asked. "It is over. Helios is dissolved. The DFI is being investigated from the top down. Aurelius Trust is bankrupt. Its partners have fled the country." The city council passed the Clean Contracts Water Act this afternoon. He turned to her, and he was not holding a weapon or a phone. He held a small, beautifully framed box. Inside, the bronze St. Brendan charm rested on dark velvet. "You kept it," she whispered. "It is a navigator's charm," he said, "but you are not lost anymore. Marisol, you were never lost. You were just invisible." He pressed it into her hands. "From now on, you do not need a charm. You are your own charm." She set the frame down. The wind gusted, cold and sharp. Seraphin stepped closer, taking a thick cashmere blanket from a nearby chair and wrapping it around her, pulling her back against his chest. He enveloped her, his good arm coming around her waist, his other hand finding hers. She leaned her head back against his shoulder, her body fitting against his. A perfect, safe alignment. The frantic heat of their first encounters had settled into a deep, profound warmth that radiated through the blanket, through their clothes, a shared core of strength. He lowered his head, his chin resting on her hair. "Will you stay till morning?" he whispered, his voice the same low rumble she had heard in the service corridor. But the words were different now. They were not a desperate plea for survival. They were a request for a lifetime. She turned in his arms, the blanket pooling around them, her hands coming up to frame his face. She looked into his eyes, the eyes of the dawn who had chosen the light, the eyes of the man who had seen her when she was invisible. Their kiss was slow, a stark contrast to the fevered, desperate kisses of their escape. This was not about survival. It was about arrival. It was the warmth of skin, the soft brush of breath, the steady beat of his heart under her palm, and the absolute certainty of being safe. It was a promise of 1,000 quiet mornings. She pulled back just enough to look at him, the lights of the port reflected in her eyes. The sun was just beginning to hint at its arrival, painting the eastern sky in shades of deep violet and gold. "Yes," she whispered, a smile touching her lips. "I will stay, for all of them." Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Story, like this video, and give us extra support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.